Movement. One of the fundamental core mechanics of every video game. Without it, well, it's not really a game at all, it's a JPEG. In speedrunning, of course, it's even more important than that. Along with things like intelligent routing, normalization, and glitches, movement is typically one of the primary ways in which speedrunners can improve their times. In episode 2 of this series, I discussed in detail the importance of movement in Ocarina of Time in particular, breaking down some of the different movement mechanics, comparing their relative speeds and the relevant trade-offs and use cases for each. Movement is hypercritical to speedrunning most games, and the speed, smoothness, and consistency with which runners move throughout their environment is what sets apart the amateur from the pro. And much to some people's surprise, racing games are also common choices for speedrunning. If you think about it, this is, in many ways, the purest form of speedrunning. The core conceit of the game itself is to go as fast as possible, so why the need for speedrunning it? Generally, speedrunning a racing game usually comes with additional meta goals above and beyond winning the race. Whether it's the pursuit of the single fastest lap around a track, or the use of glitches or tricks to skip entire portions of a race entirely. Either way, at the heart of racing games is skilled driving aimed at being able to go as fast as possible. Automotive racing is actually more relevant to a game like Super Mario 64 than you might think. Unfortunately, because of its ubiquity, it can serve as a clear and relatable example of some of the challenges and requisite skills needed for going fast. Anyone that's ever played a racing sim knows that going fast is way more than just having a lightweight car and a big, powerful engine. It takes a considerable amount of focus and experience to complete a lap in a race, even close to optimally. First, you need to know the track, the layout, the direction and sharpness of approaching turns, changes in elevation, areas where traction or visibility might be lacking. You need to develop your own heuristics for every straightaway and every curve. You'll become familiar with the sorts of speeds you'll be expecting down a long straight, at what point you'll want to let off the gas for an approaching bend, braking too soon and you're needlessly shedding that precious speed you just spent all that time gaining. Too late, and you'll be going far too fast to hit the optimal line for the turn, compromising speed, control, and ultimately safety. You may end up using something like visual markers on the track to know when you're going to want to let off the gas, downshift to shed some speed, brake just enough so you hit the intended line, allowing you to maintain maximum control through the turn so you can get hard back on the gas as you exit. Not only do you have to know the track you're racing on like the back of your hand and then apply what you've learned about optimal racing lines towards that track, you also need to know how to balance on the knife edge of maximizing speed while maintaining control of your vehicle, as well as dealing with other racers around you. It's not hard to conceptualize the complexity and skill involved in something like automotive racing, but what I personally find fascinating and what I hope to try to communicate to you in this video is just how similarly complex and impressive speedrunning a game like Super Mario 64 is. Never would I guessed that the first Super Mario game to transcend the second dimension, one of the first ever 3D games of its kind, would have been such a masterpiece of gameplay, especially when I was brand new to running it. Now, looking back at my humble beginnings getting acclimated to SM64's movement mechanics, I realize now that the clumsiness of the camera, the slipperiness of Mario's movement, the general lack of feeling of control was not the fault of the game at all. In many ways, what I experienced is actually quite similar to putting an unskilled driver behind the wheel of a race car. All that horsepower in the hands of an amateur, the torque, the inertia, the traction, the handling, compared to what they are used to driving every day, all of those things result in what's ultimately the feeling of being completely out of control. I'm sure a bunch of these folks would want to blame their cars, but come on, whose fault is it really? All the things that result in the amateur sliding into a row of parked cars is what allows the pro to do shit like this. I'm going to say something that might be considered a bit of a hot take, but compared to any racing game that I've ever played, Super Mario 64's movement is just as complex, and in many ways, feels like it has a higher skill ceiling. It has the equivalent of accelerating, braking, turning, taking optimal lines, maintaining traction, but it also takes it to a completely new level simply by the fact that you're also platforming within a complex 3D dynamic environment. As a casual observer to something like Super Mario 64 speedrunning, you might be skeptical that the game and its systems are really that complex. You might not remember it being that complicated when you played it as a kid. You might be quite familiar with the game and its mechanics while watching top runners do their thing. But don't be fooled. The design of the core mechanics of this game, a handful of buttons, a joystick, a few simple actions, and the interplay between them, allows for the emergence of nothing short of a masterpiece. Press A to jump. We're all pretty much familiar with this standard control, although you might have missed all of the various degrees of freedom subtly hiding behind this primitive, non-pressure sensitive button press. By pressing A shortly after landing, you'll execute a double jump. And if traveling fast enough and landing after a double jump, pressing A once more will trigger the triple jump, the highest jump available to Mario. Now, with only a single button, the designers of SM64's movement mechanics have already introduced complexity into the movement not seen in many other games up until this point, but they didn't stop there. Each type of jump can be further augmented by the length of the button press, the direction and magnitude of the analog stick relative to Mario's speed and direction, and Mario's speed itself. I will never forget the day early in my Mario speedrunning journey when I had a bit of an epiphany. My first major eureka moment. I was frustrated, stuck at one particular annoying point early on in the run, struggling to make my way up to the top of Whomp's Tower to fight the Whomp King. Very likely due to my experience with most other games before this, I was under the impression that jumping was more or less a consistent animation. After you press the jump button, your character would jump and hit the same height every time. So because of this, I was holding down the jump button the entire time, and at this point was focusing entirely on the lineup for the wall kick. You can clearly see me repeatedly struggling with the timing here because this setup was entirely dependent on when I initiated the first single jump. Too early and I wouldn't get high enough on the wall for the wall kick, and too late and I would bonk on the wall. I'm not sure exactly what triggered this discovery, but something I noticed accidentally was that releasing the jump button sooner during the jumps would stop Mario's ascent much sooner, allowing me to have so much more control over the timing of the jumps. I now had the ability to adjust my approach here, not only with the timing of the initial jump, but also by being able to control the airtime of both of the jumps, which turned a trick that was essentially a one-off YOLO and pray for success into something more like carefully feathering the throttle as I approached. Okay, wait a minute, that's a game changer. That's a game changer, what I just figured out. Because before I found that I was like holding it too long, but now if I let go early, I feel like I have like an actual like brake pedal now on the triple jump. Like that right there was perfect. That is exactly what I wanted to do. If I just like press A to do the triple jump, but I hold A the whole time, that's a normal spacing. But you can actually let go of A to make the jumps much shorter. But you can also control how much you hold the stick, right? So like if I am like halfway through the jump and I realize like, ooh, I need to go a little bit further, I can hold it for longer. Or if I'm getting too close, I can almost like stop myself. Now this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to SM64's mechanics. Alongside single jumps, double jumps, triple jumps, other movement mechanics Mario can do, including backflips, side flips, jump kicks, punches, wall kicks, dives, rollouts, ledge grabs, slide kicks, climbing, and more. There are entire videos out there dedicated to this subject that you should check out if you're interested. But allow me to briefly outline my top 10 favorite movement features that I didn't know when I first started running SM64. In most cases, when starting from a standstill, such as the beginning of a level, the fastest way to accelerate is to do a long jump, so this is situational. Sometimes the distance you need to cover makes long jumping impractical, or perhaps doing something like a jump kick first will help you space out the initial movement according to the layout of the level. While Mario is moving through the air, you can press B to dive, and it's generally the fastest way to travel in a straight line, although it needs to be done carefully to be optimal. When landing a dive, you can initiate a rollout and chain in another dive. The timing of the execution of this rollout dive matters. When you land, you can pretty much hit A and B right after each other, but pay close attention to Mario himself. If you see dust get kicked up from the ground as he rolls, this is an indication that you were too slow with your rollout dive and you're actually losing speed. Doing these optimally results in no dust being kicked up. Very similar to diving, although depending on the speed that you're moving, where you are in the arc of the jump, and which way the stick is pressed relative to Mario's movement, you can execute a kick in mid-air, which has a ton of different uses. If timed correctly, it can be used to briefly stall Mario's descent, lengthening his trajectory just a bit. You can do this to get that little extra bit of height or distance on a jump, and also has a few other useful side effects. Normally, after doing a double jump, the next chained jump in the sequence is going to be a triple jump, which locks Mario into an animation and prevents him from doing things like wall kicking. If you do a stall kick after the double jump, this actually resets Mario's state so that his next jump is going to be another double jump. Now you can do this in various places to chain together double jumps where it makes sense. Another interesting state-related side effect of the stall kick that also happens to be shared with a rollout off of a ledge is that Mario will not take fall damage when he lands, no matter how high he fell. The last effect related to stall kicks I'll mention here is that they prevent Mario from ledge grabbing. Now this might seem like a non-helpful result, but it's actually crucial to many aspects of Mario speedrunning where you want to explicitly avoid grabbing a ledge where it's going to cost you precious seconds, such as when jumping into a warp pipe. Punches can be used as a very small element of normalization, moving Mario forwards in the direction that you're facing by a predictable, consistent amount. While running, quickly changing the direction of your stick will cause Mario to skid to a stop. Now if you jump during this animation, it will cause Mario to do a side flip, a relatively high jump that's useful for things like close quarters platforming or as a part of larger trick setups. The best part in my opinion is that for a brief moment after the side flip is initiated, you can also then change the direction Mario is jumping again, effectively giving you full 360-degree control over the direction of the flip. Now this allows for a ton of neat platforming possibilities, even some that you might not have thought were possible. If Mario is running, he falls off a ledge, even a tiny one, and then lands on the ground again for a brief moment, this is treated as if he landed from a single jump. This can be used in all sorts of places and is often much quicker than manually initiating a single jump yourself. Many slopes in the game are too steep to run up, although depending on their surface, you can still get up them rather easily by doing what's called a silly kick. Holding A while moving up the slope and mashing B will cause Mario to do a jump kick, propelling him up the hill just enough, allowing you to repeat the process until you reach the top. Now obviously wall jumping is super useful, but not all wall jumps are created equal. There's actually different results depending on which frame of the animation you execute the jump on. Jumping on the first frame of the animation is called a Firsty and has some special properties, most notably being that it actually propels Mario significantly faster in the opposite direction. Now knowing this can come in handy for certain tricks and is also something that you might want to avoid for others, like if you want to ledge grab or get close to the wall that you just kicked off of. While running and holding the Z button, you can execute a slide kick in the same way that you can do a long jump, except you're going to replace A with B. Now this has a few uses, such as when you want to traverse short areas while staying low to the ground, most commonly seen when collecting this star in Whomp's Fortress, because given the low ceiling here, it's impractical to do the final piece of movement tech I'll be sharing. Last but not least, the ground pound is most often associated with killing enemies or pressing buttons, but actually its most useful application in speedrunning is likely its use in combination with collecting stars. When collecting stars, Mario maintains momentum in the direction he was traveling when he first touches the star, but you're no longer in control of Mario at this point. So simply by jumping up into a star, this can lead to a bunch of time lost to floating through the air for a while before landing on your feet and then initiating the animation. If you happen to ground pound when collecting a star, the ground pound animation is instantly cancelled, and Mario's momentum is instantly transitioned in the direction of the downward ground pound, causing him to land on his feet instantly, skipping any wasted airtime. So if you haven't realized it already, SM64's mechanics are way more complex than any of us knew when we played this game as kids, and all this tech and the interactions between them allow for some unreal speedrun pathing and incredibly addicting and fun control over your movement. Tangential to the movement mechanics the designers built into the game, another more subtle aspect of the design that clearly demonstrates their attention to detail and the importance placed on player control is how shadows were implemented. Here's one of my favorite excerpts from this fantastic video by that guy Glenn that I'd highly recommend you watch.
One of the big challenges that Miyamoto and his team faced was the drastic change from 2D to 3D. For example, Koizumi said that stomping on Goombas became a lot harder in 3D. On the TV screen, objects don't have the same kind of physicality. That's what makes it difficult to make people grasp the physicality and depth. Therefore, the developers decided to add shadows everywhere in the game, regardless of the light source. This way, every floating object would have a reference point on the ground, making it easier for players to predict where they would land on the ground after executing a jump. It might not be realistic, but it's much easier to play with the shadow directly below.
For anybody that has seen my Getting Tarkov series, you'll realize how close to home these ideas hit, mirroring some of the discussions I've had about Tarkov, realism, and the idea about abstraction in game design. Now, there's so much experimental and revolutionary about this game, so much careful and subtle attention to detail, so much complexity in the interactions, it's honestly hard to tell which elements were genius and intentional and which were merely accidental emergent properties of an incredibly complex and imperfect system. Either way, I'm glad that after 25 years I've finally managed to appreciate these elements that were right in front of me all along. In the last episode, I walked through the general route of the beginner 16-star speedrun, and we now have a better understanding of the game's design and its core mechanics, so now is a perfect time to dig into how speedrunners have managed to reach their hands into the gullyworks of the game, twisting these mechanics often past their breaking point for one purpose: speed. Let's examine some of the important specific aspects of the speedrun, some of the vital considerations without which its run wouldn't be the same, and then break down the core speed tricks and glitches, detailing how and why they work the way that they do. Let's start from the beginning once more. The first major speedrun trick comes within the first few seconds after you take control of Mario. As you recall, when you reach the bridge to the entrance of the castle, you'll be greeted by the cameramen, the Lakitu brothers, and will need to skip past a handful of dialogue boxes before you can continue into the castle. Naturally, this wastes a bunch of time, but luckily we have a way to skip it entirely. By running along the very edge of the railing on the bridge, we're able to bypass the event trigger. But why? Thanks to a couple of legends over at the SM64 Task Discord, I was able to locate the relevant code snippet so we can understand what's going on here. Using a tool called STROOP, along with an emulated version of Super Mario 64 on my PC, I can show Mario's 3D position on screen here as X, Y, and Z. Now, the logic that the game uses to trigger the cutscene can be simplified to something like this: 3 conditions, constraints on X, Y, and Z, all 3 required to be true. As we jump onto the ledge, we can see that Mario's X position from this perspective is the horizontal axis, left and right. Mario's Y position is the vertical axis, up and down, and Z position is the third axis, depth, forwards and backwards. Now, when he lands on the edge of the bridge railing here, we can see that his position is -547, 960, 1084. Now, this position satisfies the Y and Z position checks, but Mario's X position is just outside of the bounds, so the cutscene will not be triggered. As long as we don't move to the right at all while we run towards the castle, Mario's X position will remain to the left of that logical boundary line and the skip will be successful. Here we can see that by jumping up and moving ever so slightly to the right, we cross the -544 threshold, and as soon as I land, I trigger the event. Now, because this logic is apparently only triggered while Mario is standing on the ground, we can visualize this in a simpler way by overlaying a relevant slice of the ground where it intersects with those predefined bounds. As you can see, the bounds for this logic in the code are slightly smaller than the bounds of the bridge, so that allows Mario to proceed carefully over the red parts indicated here without triggering the cutscene. Now, in practice, this can definitely be quite harder than it looks, and there are various setups with various speeds and difficulties that make it more or less consistent. The most noteworthy part of a trick like this in the context of speedrunning is how much time does it save, and is it worth the risk of failure? Let's go ahead and take a look at a side-by-side of the normal non-skip method, one of my amateur skip attempts, and a pro's execution of the same trick to compare the time saves. As we can see, we're looking in the order of about 1 second difference between the pro strats and the amateur strats, and upwards of 9 to 10 seconds slower when comparing it to a failed attempt. Now for the pro, vying for world record times, failing Lakitu Skip is both rare enough and damaging enough to warrant a reset pretty much every time. Interestingly enough, for the amateur, failing this trick tends to be much more common and ultimately far less damaging to a run compared to a litany of other sub-optimizations, so in my opinion, resetting here should be avoided in most cases. Now, let's move on to the next major trick in the run, bomb clip. In order to understand what this trick's all about, in fact, in order to understand many of the speed tricks in this run, we need to first understand a little bit about hitboxes. Hitboxes are generally simple, invisible geometries used to represent physical objects in a simulated environment. Now, while these hitboxes are far from perfect physical representations of their graphical counterparts in the game, usually taking something much more complex in terms of geometry and replacing them with simple things like spheres, cylinders, or cubes, they're much easier and more efficient to use when simulating things like collisions and other physics-related calculations. It's much easier to calculate whether or not two big cylinders are intersecting than it is to determine if a tiny rotating slice of a cylinder is intersecting any part of a character made up of hundreds of different shaped polygons that are partially through a complex animation while simultaneously moving. These calculations can occur multiple times per frame, so even at 1996 levels, we're talking about hundreds of calculations per object per second. Naturally, we want to keep these as simple as possible. Now, these are always far from perfect, but for all intents and purposes, they are good enough in most cases, especially for something like an early 3D game from the late 90s. Pretty much everything inside of the environment that Mario can interact with, including Mario himself, has its own hitbox, which we can see here. As soon as Mario picks up an object, we can see that the hitbox disappears, which makes sense as we don't want this object to interact the same way as if it were right next to Mario if he happens to be holding it. They effectively become a single hitbox that share the same position. As soon as Mario lets go of the object, its original hitbox returns at whatever position the object is in with one interesting side effect. If that object's hitbox overlaps Mario's at all, the game compensates for this by moving Mario slightly backwards so that their hitboxes occupy two discrete geometries. Now, as you'll see, this interesting interaction is quite useful for speedrunners in a few different ways. When it comes to interactions with the Bob-omb in particular, things get much more complicated. I'll refer you to Pan and Koich's video here that goes into detail on the underlying mechanics of what we're going to see here, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to give you an oversimplified, abridged explanation. As you throw the bomb and it lands, the explosion animation begins, which takes a few frames and consists of the bomb rapidly growing in size. Before the explosion occurs, you can re-grab the bomb, and Mario is going to be pushed backwards away from the bomb that he's grabbed at a speed proportional to the size of the bomb. The later you grab it, the larger it is, the faster you're going to move. Ultimately, we want to place ourselves in line with these bars here, which for all intents and purposes is just a solid wall, so that when we throw the bomb and its hitbox interacts with Mario's, causing Mario to get pushed back away from it, his resulting position is going to be on the other side of the wall. We've essentially tricked the game into placing Mario on the opposite side of a barrier that he shouldn't be able to access. Now again, we have to ask ourselves for what? To answer this question, let's compare one of my runs when I was first starting, sloppily using the normal ground pound the pole method, the amateur version of the speedrun trick after I had become a little bit better with the bomb clip, and then to an execution done by a pro. As we can see, the pro managed to collect the star a full 4 seconds faster than the amateur doing the same trick, and the newbie collected the star in almost twice the time it took the amateur. This trick, if done right, stands to save us in the ballpark of around 15 seconds. Now, while I was grinding these runs in the beginning, a little rule of thumb I tried to use to avoid resetting purely based on my ego was that as long as I succeeded at one of the first two tricks, either bomb clip or Lakitu Skip, I should avoid resetting. This let me continue lots of runs that I would otherwise have felt like I needed to reset, when in reality failing both shouldn't necessitate resetting when you're just starting out. The more we dig into this run, the more we're going to see just how small 25 seconds is to an amateur like myself, but how enormous it is to a more skilled runner. Now let's move on to the next trick that happens to confuse the most people who watch it. One of the most infamous, random-looking, inscrutable Super Mario 64 tricks. Canonless. In the last episode, I showed how this star was stuck inside of this wall here, and it can be accessed by using the cannon to shoot Mario at the wall, breaking it, uncovering the hidden star, and allowing Mario to grab it. As you may have guessed based on the name of this trick, there is a way to get this star without using the cannon that, lo and behold, just so happens to involve hitboxes again, although this time with a slight twist. When Mario's hanging from a ledge, his hitbox remains level with the ledge itself, as if he was standing up on the ledge rather than hanging off the side. This makes interactions with enemies tricky, as you're not as safe as you might assume when hanging from a ledge, but also has some side effects that makes things like Canonless possible. Conveniently enough, it appears as though there's some sort of tiny invisible ledge underneath where the star is floating here, and if you're careful enough, precise enough, or lucky enough, and able to line up Mario perfectly with this ledge at the right angle and position, it'll trigger a ledge grab. There are a few different setups that you may or may not have seen, but this is probably one of the more common ones. Now, to some of you, this might look totally random. To others, you might identify this as a process known as normalization. It's essentially a choreographed series of inputs, with the primary goal being a fast, reliable, and consistent setup for a specific trick. So, what's going on here? You know what? Why don't I let you guys peek behind the curtain for a moment here, and you can see what I'm doing when I'm trying to test and visualize the things I'm trying to show you. I'll skip all the cropping and everything to make this look pretty and just show you what I'm looking at. As we can see with a little bit of magic using the program STROOP I mentioned before, if I turn on hitboxes, I go frame by frame, right before Mario's about to grab the ledge, I'm able to manipulate the camera position to be a bit better for us to see what's going on here. And here we can more clearly see the ledge grab causing Mario's out-of-place hitbox to intersect with the star. Now in a single frame, Mario grabs the ledge and his hitbox collides with the star, triggering the star collection animation on the next frame, which takes priority over pretty much everything else. But because Mario's hanging from the ledge, an invalid location for this animation, he's pretty much instantly transported to the ground beneath his feet, where the animation finishes. So, what does this mean for the speedrun itself? As you can see, there's different setups with different degrees of difficulty and speed. Looking at another example of a decent but clumsy amateur execution of the trick shows that it can be done in the ballpark of around 20 seconds, with the pros being able to do it in half that time. The normal method for obtaining the star using the cannon just isn't practical for a 16-star speedrun, so doing Canonless is basically required in this run unless you substitute in a completely different star from elsewhere, which is almost definitely going to be much slower. The second and final trick I'm going to be discussing in Whomp's Fortress is known as Owless. Obviously, this involves getting the star in the floating caged island without using the owl, which involves some careful platforming, a well-timed triple jump wall kick off the cage here, staying as close as you can after the kick to just barely land on the island to collect the star. This is one of those cases I mentioned earlier when talking about avoiding Firstys. In this instance, where we want to avoid doing a first frame wall kick to prevent the big speed boost off of the cage, making it pretty much impossible to land on the inside. Now, for some reason, this trick seemed a bit controversial to some onlookers who were surprised that I chose not to do it. The reason why was that I simply found that I wasn't consistent enough with the execution. I could pull it off maybe 50% of the time at best, and the downside of failure was a big loss of time that was always far slower, around 10 seconds per attempt. In my humble opinion, if I'm looking at a coin flip success rate, the benefit of a single 5-second time save with the potential risk of one or more 10-second time losses just isn't worth it. Now, speaking of time lost, I'm experimenting with a few things to maybe make the YouTube algorithm gods happy with me. I'm going to try to make this video a little bit shorter, breaking it down into multiple episodes. So let's take a break from discussing the last few speedrun tricks and glitches, which I'll leave for you in the next episode. And in the meantime, get you up to date on my speedrun journey through Super Mario 64. I have to warn you, you ain't seen nothing yet. When I first started running Super Mario 64, my original goal was to finish the 16-star run in under 30 minutes. Now this proved to have been a bit low to have set the bar, as on only my 85th run, I managed a time of 26 minutes and 11 seconds. Setting my sights a bit higher, my new goal was sub 25 minutes, although within the next few days I already had a PB of 24 minutes and 4 seconds. It was clear that I had been sandbagging a bit with my goals. I knew I really wanted to challenge myself, to push myself. I wanted to set a goal that I would be proud to achieve. I decided to lower my goal time to the next major milestone, sub 20 minutes. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do it yet, but I knew I was going to give it everything I had. About 40 runs later, I brought my time down to the next minute mark, 23 minutes even. The PBs were still coming fairly steadily until run number 225, where I managed to skip the 22-minute mark entirely with a new PB of 21 minutes and 56 seconds, although it was appearing as though my improvements were experiencing some diminishing returns. It took me only 40 runs to go from 24 down to 23 minutes, but it took over 100 runs to go from 23 down to under 22. Fast forward a bit to this run, number 394. I had a perfect start. I hit Lakitu Skip and Bomb Clip, putting me on pace with my PB. Leaving Womps, I golded, putting me 23 seconds ahead. After another gold on CCM, I was 31 seconds ahead. After hitting a clean Dark World and nailing my Bowser throw, another gold put me 33 seconds ahead. This is the sort of run you dream about. I was in the zone. I kept on good pace throughout the rest of the run until BLJs. Holy fuck. This was it. All I needed was a clean, safe Bowser in the sky, and I'd have my sub 20. Take the beginning smooth, don't get shocked, no stupid mistakes, just be in control. Alright, that was clean, although the worst was yet to come. The long jump to the ledge grab, followed by the stall kick, triple jump dive to grab the pole, was one of the most tense moments in the run for me. It was so easy for me to do in practice, but at this point in the run, I was always so tense that it felt like I could barely control my fingers. I don't know how to explain it. Gotta make sure that you're not going too fast so that you bonk your head on the platform above, and too slow that you don't make it to the ledge at all. Okay, first part done. Now, the make or break moment in Bowser in the sky. So many ways that I could fuck this up, so many ways I'd killed runs here before. If I don't jump high enough or short enough, I'll fall. If I press B too soon or too late, I'm gonna dive and fall. You need to be going just the right speed and press B in just the right point on your jump to perform the stall kick, giving you the added distance you need to make it to the next platform. Also, resetting your double jump so that you can double jump once more over this platform, allowing you to do a triple jump dive to grab the pole. After I land this, you can see that physical tension being released here, as I knew that it was going to be smooth sailing until Bowser throws. I made it to Bowser at 1847. This was my fastest run yet. I took a deep breath. I was actually thinking about Cheese's break the record live moment right here, thinking that if he could do that, breaking a world record live, then surely I could break a much easier arbitrary milestone while streaming in my pajamas in my basement. I was nervous, but I was confident and ready. First throw, landed it. Second throw, perfect. At this point, I had nearly 45 seconds to make the last throw. I could feel the excitement boiling up. No need to rush, take my time, just line up the throw and throw when I was ready. I let go of Bowser perfectly. I honestly don't think I've ever thrown a straighter Bowser throw in all my life. And then, find out what happens next time on Heroes of Time.